Roll the clip.
Criticisms, though. We love the combat, right? How the game unlocks itself and what you do with it is just premium Monster Hunter shit. You get 2 weapons in this game. That's a massive change. Like a big change from previous Monster Hunter titles. You get this interconnected world. Environments that naturally connect from one place to the next. Every single biome connects to the other biome. You can just like run there. Crazy environmental changes, interconnected world, and dual weapons. Massive changes to like Monster Hunter in general. They're all fluff. They're all fluff. They're all fluff.
They're all fluff.
Yes, thank you, Lord Maximilian Dude, first of his name, King of the Wyverians and the Furthest Hunters, Father of Ripley, Breaker of Arkveld's chains, and Keeper of reasonable takes. We give thanks, we give praise. Alright, I don't know what combination of UK accents that was, but let's get a bit serious now. Apologies, please forgive my super boring heavy bowgun play playing in the background right now. I just wanted some kind of backdrop while you guys just listen to me talk and perhaps start a little conversation and see what everyone else thinks about this topic. So, it's been just over a week since the launch of Monster Hunter Wilds. After finishing the story and playing around with the endgame, I took some time to gather my thoughts. I spoke to some people about my views on the game, but I didn't go scorched earth because, the game sold 8 million in 3 days, and if there's one way to look like an unhinged hater, it's climbing to the top of the mountain to try and summon the rain on everyone else's enjoyment. But now that some time has passed, and now that bigger content creators such as Max are being, more confidently vocal about the game's issues, I don't feel so nervous about climbing that mountain anymore. So I did it. And during that climb, there's one word which kept echoing in my mind, and that word is cohesion, which is a thing that WoW doesn't have a lot of, and it's pretty much the main problem I have with the game. Max describes it as,
it lacks focus.
I describe it as a foundation without much purpose. For example, we have super large maps which aren't very memorable outside of a few standout areas. We can carry 2 weapons now, but most players are likely to just end up running 2 of the same weapon because of how armor skills and decorations work. We have an awesome mount to get you from A to B very efficiently, at the cost of making it difficult for players to feel the need to actually learn the maps due to sacred automation. We have a bunch of small villages with different NPCs which offer different interactables, probably to make the world feel bigger and more lived in, but in practice, you end up just wanting everything in one place, the way it's always been in previous Monster Hunter games. And that's the thing, right? Making something the way it's always been isn't inherently a good reason to keep something the same way it was before, but with Wilds, some areas felt as if they added or changed things for the sake of it, rather than there actually being a cool, tangible reason for the change, to the point where it may have actually just been better to just keep certain aspects the way it's always been. For example, the weather changes are nice on paper, they look great, when it's not affecting your performance, they look really great. But it would have been much better if there was just more gameplay features surrounding it to create a greater purpose behind its existence. As of right now, when the weather changes to the inclemency period, everything looks different. Some different resources and map events will appear, and most notably, the apex monster of that zone will show up. That's nice, but that's it. And it's also not very different from how it was in Monster Hunter World and how different monsters would spawn at different times. It's a mechanic with a different coat of paint, but it's the same in function. To me, if you're going to have this very specific style of weather system and ecology, why not lean into it much further? Why not have very rare monsters which only spawn during, specific weather periods, during a specific time of the day, in a specific location, maybe after you've met very certain conditions, such as like maybe you place a Rathian egg in a specific part of the map during the plenty during this time of day, and there's a chance for something crazy interesting to spawn, like something that would get players talking and trying things and interfacing with the huge environment that they've created. Imagine how cool it would be if someone posted a screenshot on Reddit showing like a super rare version of Ray Dow with a different color and 9 stars and drops 1 ruby from each of the different apexes from all of the different maps, and maybe it's got like guaranteed thunder RTN materials or something, you know? And then like everyone will go into the Reddit thread and start asking questions on how to get it to respawn. You know, they'll start searching for lobbies or investigations with that specific super duper rare raid owl quest, right? Like that to me is an example of what a cohesive system would look like. You have an idea which can give way to a very specific result thanks to the system, instead of having a system because, you know, big AAA game go brr, basically. There's just so much more which could have been done with the systems they've created, and it's a shame that they've pretty much made a shinier version of the systems we've had before. Here's another one. What if there was a reason to actually travel between maps on Sacred Back? Because right now there isn't. They could have easily had some special, huge, crazy reward hunting quest where, like, you know, maybe it's a time attack, right? It's a time attack where you got to hunt 3 different monsters across different maps within a time period, and you're not allowed to fast travel, so you got to actually like use the sacred to get from one part of the map to another, kill a monster, go to another area. It could be something like you start in the Windward Plains, fight a raid owl, then you have to go all the way to the Scarlet Forest, like on foot or on Sacred Back, Chicken Uber, Chocobo. You go to the Scarlet Forest, you kill maybe Kongalala and 5 Kongas before you head off to the Ice Shard cliff area, kill a Hirabami or an Ursula. Basically, some kind of special quest that forces players to not only defeat monsters quickly, but also to find the quickest path from one map to another. You know, like actually utilizing the concept of having interconnected biomes, like a multi-zone time attack. And yes, I'm sure ideas like this will be present in updates or whatever expansion there will be in the future. But I think some of these ideas could have easily, like extremely easily, could have been presented in the base game. There's no real reason why they couldn't have been. And sure, some people will say, well, base world didn't have the most robust, interesting endgame, and that's true. But I don't think, sometimes it's not always about comparing one base to another, especially when the previous base game ended up becoming Iceborne, which ended up becoming Capcom's best-selling game of all time. Well, I guess that's going to be eclipsed by Wilds in just a matter of maybe months, or maybe it will take a year, but I'm pretty sure it's on track to doing so. But yeah, I just don't think that saying, well, World's endgame wasn't that fascinating doesn't mean that Wilds' base game endgame shouldn't be that fascinating either, right? Like, what about the lessons that you've learned from the ending of the previous game, whether it's Rise or World, right? Like, why not? I wish more developers would take more of the end result of a previous game and start the next game with many systems or mechanics from that previous game, right? There's no need to hit the reset button every time simply because it's a new game. This reminds me of Diablo 3 and Diablo 4 for anyone who's played those games. For those that don't know, Diablo 3 essentially had a wardrobe where you could save your build to use like a loadout. Essentially, it's basically loadouts from other games, right? So if you were a monk, you could go into your wardrobe, save your current monk gear under, I don't know, Holy Monk, and then you change up your gear, maybe doing like a crazy long range, zip around the map, speedy Sonic the Hedgehog monk, right? And you save that loadout. And then anytime you're doing different content, maybe the Holy Monk is better for this endgame content, and then the Sonic the Hedgehog monk is good for another one. You could just click of a button, load, like equip that set, and then go about your business. So this system came or was introduced in Diablo 3. Not at the beginning of Diablo 3, like some point later on in Diablo 3's existence. Fast forward, Diablo 4 comes out many, many years later. Guess what Diablo 4 doesn't have in its base game? No wardrobe. And it's just inexcusable. It's like, you had the wardrobe system in the previous game. Sure, it didn't exist in the very beginning, but you made it. You saw that a lot of people liked it. It's very, very convenient. It makes people want to play the game even more. This is something that should be by default now present in the next game, right? The fact that Diablo 4 only just recently got the wardrobe system in season 7 of the game, almost like 2 years after it launched, is inexcusable. So going back to Monster Hunter Wilds, I don't see a reason why a lot of those cool, more interesting endgame mechanics couldn't have been in the current base game. It shouldn't need to be the case of, oh, we'll get the more interesting base endgame stuff after 5 title updates have come out, or when whatever the Iceborne version of Wilds will be a year and a half later, right? It shouldn't need to be that way. It shouldn't need to be done in that order. Like, there's no reason why these kinds of cool ideas, whether it exists in the base game's endgame or whether it's just like a unique, interesting, different kind of quest that you can do in the base game, right? I just don't believe in the concept of like, oh, just wait until later. Like, well, yeah, no shit, right? We're gonna get those things later, I'm sure. But I'm arguing that you've got huge fan base, huge, powerful, planetary destruction level of IP popularity. This is, if there was ever going to be a playground to toy around and really push the envelope for what your game is capable of, it should be now. It should be with this game, or it should have been in the entry point of this game. And I just disagree with it only existing way later down the line. Now, let's move on to everyone's favorite topic. Say it with me now. Difficulty. Yay! Yes! Woohoo! Is the game easier than I'd like it to be? Yes. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. However, I have a slightly different perspective on why I think it's easy, and it's because the player power is way higher than the monster power. This is clearly something quite purposeful from the devs and has led to a little bit of a conundrum, in my opinion. Now, is it good that Capcom have taken a huge power fantasy approach of the game? Well, the answer to that question is going to depend on the player and what they like to get out of playing Monster Hunter. For me though, I like a bit more friction on the way up. I'm fine with low rank being purposely easy, but I would have preferred if there was more skill check monsters or armor check monsters or both peppered throughout low rank. For anyone out there who's played Path of Exile 1 or Path of Exile 2, you may be familiar with a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Rogers, who's the game director of PoE 2. About a year ago, he had an interview with Preach Gaming on his YouTube channel. In the interview, the topic of difficulty and how much a player should be expected to die was brought up. In fact, it was brought up by Jonathan himself. I'm going to play the clip, but just to provide a bit of context, Jonathan asked Preach how often does he think that a player should die against the first boss in PoE 1. Let's see what he says.
So here's a question, right? How many times should you die to Hillock before you succeed? What should that number be?
It obviously depends on the class you choose, but I think if you could tune it so you don't die, but it's a tight battle, you've done a really good job.
I actually disagree with that. I actually think it's better to make death less expensive for the player, but make you expect to die more often. Because what I want you to do is die twice, and then the third time you succeed, and that way you'll have 3 things. One of them is you'll know this is a game where you should die, that you should that you might have to spend a little bit of time working out the mechanics and concentrate a little bit on the boss. And the second, and so that way when you die later, you don't feel bad. Because if the first time you die is like level 20, then you're conditioned at that point to be like, this is not a game where I should be dying, so therefore death feels bad. Whereas if you're like, I died to Hillock, and then maybe you kill him on the second time, or maybe you kill him on the third time, to me, I think that's good.
So in Jonathan's game, he'd like bosses to kill the player ideally 2 times before they succeed. But obviously, due to different weapons, player skill, RNG, multiplayer, that's unlikely to happen at all times. The point, though, is that the monster encounters were designed with this goal in mind in order to create a specific kind of experience or increased potential of said experience. Now, this is a philosophy I 100% agree with, and it's the direction I wish Capcom would have taken with this game, because I believe it would have just made the game far more engaging in a way that doesn't suddenly make it unappealing for new players. If everyone who played this game solo failed to kill a few monsters on their first attempt but were able to succeed in the second try after switching up their playstyle or weapon, that would be a much better designed game because it encourages players to engage with more of the in-game systems earlier on instead of just engaging with them in high rank. But what is it about the monsters that makes them so easy to mop the floor with, particularly in solo play? Well, you see, the reason why this happens all comes down to the overall design philosophy mentioned earlier. But it's also assisted by the game heavily leaning into the power fantasy a lot more than Monster Hunter World did. In Wilds, monsters have so many more ways to be flinched or toppled. You've got your regular flinches, you've got the wound breaks, you have focus strikes, which locks the monster into a short, I'm waiting to be toppled animation. You got offsets, you have power clash animations, which again, leave the monster open to be hit by other players while the clash is taking place. Not to mention mount topples, flashes, traps, and all the other ways to CC a monster. As fun as it is, it does come together to create a world where monsters have many more ways to get stomped on, particularly in multiplayer where other players can still pump out damage during many of these animations where the monster is completely helpless. I hope moving forward, some monsters or encounters have the ability to not be affected by some of these things, or have abilities that hinder some of our abilities. Maybe there's a monster with a roar so threatening that you can't call your sacred for a short while. Or maybe there's a monster that gets stronger if you don't break its wounds within a certain time. The possibilities are endless. I'm just not sure if that's the direction Capcom cares to go with this game, which is a shame in my opinion because again, and I really want to highlight this point, I don't think any of these ideas takes away from or makes it impossible for the game to be as popular with them implemented. So, just to summarize, my gripes with the game doesn't change the reality of how fun it is to play. Because it is. It's visually amazing when the textures decide to load, and there are some really cool fights. My issues are mostly from a philosophical standpoint, and the game has plenty of time and money to make some of these changes without taking away from what they set out to create in the first place. If you liked the video, please like, subscribe, share, and follow me on Twitch to be part of discussions like this live. Thanks for watching.